India is actually a major center for Afghans and Afghan refugees. It's not really known because of the fact that the United States is basically, they looked at Pakistan as the way where the Afghan problem has been there. Pakistan is basically a location for Afghans. But India, Delhi especially, is a huge center for Afghans, especially moderate Afghans. And when we're talking about Afghanistan, we're talking about the Pashtuns, who are regarded these days as a bit fanatic. We have to remember that for hundreds of years, you had Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh shrines in Pashtunistan, in the heart of Pashtun territory in both Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan. And they were completely unmolested. The people were allowed to practice their religion very freely. But the fact of the matter is, Pashtuns have been, like Kashmiris, a very Sufi and a very moderate group. So the problem, of course, came in the 1980s when the Soviet invasion took place, and the United States decided to go with the Pashtun religious extremists against the Pashtun nationalists. You have a large number of people in Pashtunistan who are nationalists. They believe the Durand line, I'm sure all of you have known the Durand line, which separated two parts of Pashtunistan and gave one part to Pakistan. It is supposed to be a 99-year lease, but which expired, and which is still the status quo prevails. Pashtun nationalists want a united Pashtunistan. So for them, what it means is that what is territory in Pakistan has to come back to united Pashtunistan. So the Pashtun nationalist is definitely the enemy of the military or a lot of society in Pakistan. The choice was basically arming the Pashtun nationalists against the Russians. Because everybody in Afghanistan was extremely unhappy about the Russians coming in, barring a few people who were personally, I guess, enriched by the Russians coming in, or had a very, very unusual ideological bent, that is a very Soviet or communistic bent. Instead of that, what they did was they decided to go with the ISI's thing that the best fighters are going to be religious fanatics. So not only in Pashtunistan, but across the world, religious fanatics were drafted. And because there were not enough religious fanatics, schools were introduced in which curricula were introduced to make people religious fanatics. To make people even more fanatic and Wahhabi than they already are, which frankly was not. Because the Muslim world, frankly, is not at all an extremist world. If you look at Turkey, if you look at India, if you look at Indonesia, it's actually a very moderate world. If you look at the Arab countries, even today you've got all kinds of communities working in the Arab countries. If the people in that part of the world were really communal, it would be very difficult for someone to work there who is not a Sunni Muslim or a Shia Muslim, whatever is the dominant community there. The fact is, it's not at all an extremist group, but it's been widely, it was a lot, the curricula were changed. Sometimes there were some tampering of the if you look at some of the holy books, some of the explanations, some of the characterizations were deliberately radicalized, so that increasingly you had madrasas that became factories for churning out more and more radical points of view. Today, when this kind of radical point of view is regarded as mainstream, as regarded as the norm, we have to remember that it became increasingly the norm artificially in the 1980s. There was a very different norm in the past, and this has become a new norm. And of course, I would like to say that I'm delighted now, one, that the Egyptian army has put paid to the Muslim Brotherhood, that Sheikh Hasina has put paid to the Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh, because for the first time the moderate Muslim majority is fighting back against the extremist fringe. It's always been a complaint that the moderate Muslims, who are overwhelmingly the majority, don't fight back against the extremists. It was difficult for them because most of the money is with the extremists. Almost all the top religious institutions have been captured by the extremists. A lot of the masjids have been captured by the extremists. But today you see a fight back across the Muslim world of the moderate majority fighting the extremist minority. To my point of view, that's a very healthy sign. That's what's happening. Even in Libya, you see that happening. In Syria, Bashar Assad is winning the war because the bulk of the Sunnis in Syria are on his side. After seeing what happened in Libya, they don't want these fanatics to take over in Syria. He could not have been holding on unless the bulk of the population were on his side, I can tell you, despite the massive effort that's been done by Turkey, Qatar, France, etc. to arm people who are his enemies. So what I'm trying to tell you, Pashtuns were basically a moderate people. Afghanistan was basically a moderate country. But unfortunately, the Americans said we'll go with the extremists and we will not go with the Pashtun, the nationalist Pashtun, because that would be negative to Pakistan. So you have a situation in which a country has basically outsourced a war to another country, which is now using the war through the prism of its own perceived national interest. So that war was conducted by Pakistan not from the prism of Western national interest, forget global national interest, or even Western interest, not even from the prism of US national interest, but exclusively from the point of view of Pakistan national interest as defined by the Pakistan military, which is the only state actor in Pakistan that the Americans gave the time of day to. Whether it's China, whether it's America, they disagree on many things. On one thing they're absolutely united. It's only the Pakistan army that we need to worry about. It's only the Pakistan army we need to deal with. Others are basically just a bunch of clowns and jokers. We don't have to worry about them. So this what happened there. Now, September, of course, happened in September. Around March 20 of the same year, March of that particular year, 2001, what happened was that there was a friend of mine. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to give names. I'm not going to give names until I get permission from that gentleman. A friend of mine mentioned to me that the relatives of the governors of Jalalabad and Kandahar had come to Delhi, and they were talking about some major operation that's being planned by Mullah Omar and Mr. Bin Laden in the United States before the end of the year. Now, I wanted to know who these friends are, what they are, so we met the relatives. I met the relatives of these people. They came to what is defined as a safe house. It basically means a ramshackle rickety structure that is furnished without any sense of aesthetics at all. So you want to run away from there as soon as you enter it. But we met them there, and they mentioned about the activities that are going on, that people have been in the United States, they're going to conduct some operation in the United States, some major operation in which thousands of people are going to be killed, etc., XYZ. And they said, look, these two governors really don't like these Pakistanis and these foreigners and these Saudis who have now come over and taken over territory. Mullah Omar has become a kind of a prisoner of these Pakistanis and these Saudis and all that. We like our independence back. So we are ready to capture these guys. Obviously, they were ready, provided a certain amount of, I would say, any transaction involves a certain cost. So they mentioned a certain cost. Now, it seemed to be, at that point in time, there was no talk about 9/11. There was no talk about terror attack in the United States. I mean, frankly, the day before 9/11 happened, I was with Jack Snyder, who's a professor of political science in New York. And Snyder, I told Snyder that there could be a problem in New York. There could be a terror attack in New York. Snyder told me New York is the safest city in the world. This was less than 24 hours before 9/11 actually happened. I don't know, about. He would have been right; it would not happen. But I want to go back to that. We went back to our own people. That is, people in our own government, and they were terrified of this kind of thing. First of all, they refused to believe it. Secondly, they said, look, this is too big for us. And certainly the Afghans were expecting a lot more than the pennies that the Indians spent. Because I'd like to say, quite frankly, from my experience, I've seen, for example, Afghans being paid $100, $200, $300, $400 every month. Because they didn't have any other money. And these Afghans have been far more loyal than the same Afghans who were paid $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in one shot by the United States. As soon as they got $300,000, they would go against the United States. The Afghans who used to get $100, $200, $300 a month have remained secular and broadly in sync with Indian interests for quite some time. So I don't want to make any comments about methods of payment. I would not even like to call this $200, $300 payment. It's basically to help our friends survive in a country where inflation is going up, week by week and day by day. But anyway, so what do we do? Obviously, the attack is going to be in the United States. And they did name, in fact, very interestingly, Washington and New York as the locations where the attack is going to be planned. So I went to the United States. I went and I met people in the State Department. I met people in various other agencies, etc. They were very, they said, look, you're an Indian. You don't like the Pakistanis. You think that this Bin Laden is going to create a problem? Rubbish. We got him covered. You think Mullah Omar is going to create a problem? Nothing at all. Mullah Omar has sent somebody here. As we speak now, Mullah Omar has got a delegation from the Taliban here, and they're meeting about 3 rooms away from where you're speaking. Could be. A lot of Taliban delegations used to go to the United States. So quite likely, unfortunately, I didn't bump into Mr. Mullah Omar's delegation at that point in time. Nobody listened to me. I flew back. I again went back a month later because something was nagging at me. I talked to these guys again and they seemed very serious. I checked back and they were the governors of Nalapat and Kandahar. These are serious people asking for a serious thing. I went back to the United States and this time I met people, congressional people, the staff people on the Hill, and said the same kind of story that look, something big is happening, these 2 guys are happening. For God's sake, get your government interested. We need not meet in India because we are all covered. We don't dare to have this kind of activity taking place on our territory. Central Asia or Dubai or Abu Dhabi or something, this meeting can come. You discuss it with these relatives, discuss it with these governors and try and do something. Nobody touched it. I mean, they just did not believe that this is a serious kind of thing that it could exist. And I think about a little less than 2 months after that, 9/11 happened. And of course, one good thing about the Americans, they're very good at covering up their own mistakes. The same policy makers who said he must be friendly with the Taliban, in 24 seconds they became anti-Taliban. And they've been anti-Taliban all through. If you look at the the same people now, I've got people like Steve Cohen, who are very strongly rooting for the Pakistan army. All of a sudden they're negative on the Pakistan army. People who are very negative on India and Kashmir, all of a sudden keeping quiet in Kashmir. The good thing about them, they wipe out institutional memory very, very quickly. Because I really don't believe there's a kind of a redressal mechanism at play there. Because the consequences of failure are very huge. If you fail, you go before a congressional committee, you go before this, you lose your income, you lose your contracts, and so many things. So whatever it is, in any case, I came back a disappointed man. And 9/11 happened. As it happened, my wife and I were in New York when 9/11 took place. We were in that Lexington Hotel. That's the Taj Hotel. That time it was the Taj. Now Sam Bada has bought it over. I think it's called the Radisson or something on that Lexington. We were there a few blocks away from where 9/11 happened. So that was a coincidence. It was not for giving any warning or anything. It was purely because I had some lectures in New York and Washington, so I wanted to go for these lectures. Of course, in Washington, I did mention on the way to one of my meetings, I think it was the State Department, I passed by a center, a mosque and center, and I listened to a sermon in the center. Now, the sermon was conducted actually in Urdu, so I could understand it. In Arabic, I had a little more difficulty. And the sermon was amazing, blood-chilling. We are in the middle of absolute sin. We are in the middle of sinners. These are terrible people. They take pork. They take alcohol. Their women go about in all kinds of things I'm not going to mention in civilized company. And absolutely barbaric people, and they deserve to be put down. They deserve absolutely bloodthirsty. I said, look, are you guys aware of what kind of a sermon is being said? Just again, a few blocks from where you are. Oh, that's all right. Freedom of speech. We have no problem with that. It's freedom of speech. I said, look, they're saying that you guys should be killed. Of course not. They'd never say that. But these are nice guys. For God's sake, you're an Indian. You're a Hindu. We know that you're prejudiced against these people. We know that you're prone to telling lies because Winston Churchill has told us that Hindus tell lies. From the very beginning, Mr. Churchill has identified. Now, of course, not only Winston Churchill, but Wendy Doniger also has confirmed the same thing. So, look, I tried to tell her I'm a Buddhist, I'm not a Hindu, but it didn't work. They didn't seem to know that much difference between a Buddhist and a Hindu. In any case, nothing happened, let me put it that way. So it was because of that, and of course, these things did come out in print. The people whom I spoke to did corroborate that I went to them and spoke to them. The State Department and other national security guys in the United States have not said a word. I went public that, look, this is the warning I gave at this particular point in time. They never said a word about it. They never controverted it because they could not. But they never confirmed it either because they didn't want to confirm. So it's in that slightly spooky context that Blaise said that something about 9/11. It's a chance encounter with 2 people who are relatives of 2 governors. But the worst part of the story I left for the end of it. The worst part of the story is my last meeting with these 2 guys, they almost killed me. And the reason they did that was because the Mullah Omar and Bin Laden had been informed by the Pakistan army that these two governors are in touch with Indians, and who are in touch with Indians against them, against the Taliban, against Mullah Omar, etc., and they should be taken care of. So Mullah Omar and these two governors were questioned. Luckily, they were practiced liars, clearly, because they managed to escape. Because they managed to persuade Mr. Omar and Mr. Bin Laden, who clearly were very credulous people, that they were innocent. But they communicated to the relatives, this gentleman you spoke to has betrayed us to the Pakistanis. It turned out the Americans in the State Department told their Pakistani friends, whether it's over a glass of alcohol or whether it was on a table, I don't know. And the Pakistanis naturally informed their friends, Mr. Bin Laden, who has been a guest of theirs for quite some time, until the last final seconds of his life, and Mr. Omar. So, quite frankly, after that I've been very nervous about telling the Americans anything which I believe they could, which will be unpleasant if they communicate to the Pakistanis. So, that is this entire unpleasant chapter. Now, I'm not sure if the governors were really, summoned with their meetings took place in Dubai. 9/11 could have been prevented. It's very easy to go in for all kinds of hypothetical scenarios, if, but, etc. But it is a fact that possibly there were many other such early leads that were ignored. But this was certainly one lead in which I and a friend of mine who's very active in the Afghan community, an Indian friend, who by the way is a Pashtun settler. His family has roots in Pashtunistan, but post-independence they came and settled in India. So from that point of view, he's a Pashtun himself. And the two of us have direct knowledge of that particular kind of situation. So that is, I thought I'd just explain to you in somewhat detail, because Blaze is slightly mystic comment. About 2611, there's nothing very major about it. There are some small locations in the world that are aware of the fact that sometimes I've helped a situation in which policy has been helpful to them. So their people are grateful, there's a certain amount of trust. So in one particular location, as soon as 2611 happened, I was in that particular location. Their people told me that according to the information they have, this is an ISI operation. They were tracking it with their contacts. They got in touch with other locations and they found out this is an ISI operation. The training was done by the ISI. The Pakistan Navy was involved. Commandos were involved in training them. It was very much a Pakistan Army operation. Not even an ISI, but regular Pakistan Army operation. I think 3rd December 2008, if I remember, United Press International, UPI, I carried a piece that ISI is behind this. For about a year and a half after that, that was denied. By the Americans, by Mr. Chidambaram, by everybody else. Although I think by then the facts were pretty well known that it was ISI. For whatever reason, it was denied. But that was the first time that anybody came public and said these were not just big players, these were not rogue elements. This was a planned operation by the Pakistan Army against the Indian state. All I'm saying is it's an interesting world out there. And it's an interesting world where you get interesting information out there. So, I'm not saying anything more than that, except to say that we operate in different worlds, different dimensions. And sometimes we operate in multiple worlds and multiple dimensions. But there is a lot of information floating around. And today what's happening is that unless you please everybody, there will be somebody who doesn't like you and will give information about you. And it's impossible to please everybody. So the result is almost every operation now has become much more transparent than it was in the past. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, operations could have been done more or less confidentially. Today it's very difficult because people are going to talk, people are going to write, people are going to go on the net, people are going to go on Facebook or whatever. It's much more difficult and you've got to function in that kind of a world.